Welcome back to the Faithfully Driven podcast.
So today we're going to talk about what a godly marriage looks like. And so when we studied this, we studied for the opposite role. So Aaron studied into what is expected of the woman, and I studied what was expected of the man.
Right, so wives, submit to your husband.
And if there are any female listeners out there, just know that I roll my eyes dramatically every time he says that. But I have a good biblical answer for that we'll get to later on.
And I might surprise you in how I see wives submit to your husbands as well.
So, a couple days ago, I started a Bible study that it's called A Kingdom Marriage. And one of the very first days, it says, when your marriage is brought under the rule of God, your relationship can flourish and become all that God intended it to be. But that that is such a broad thing. What does God intend for our marriage to look like? And I think that can be answered in a plethora of parts because we each have separate roles of what we bring to the table as we are unified as one.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's just it. You said it right there. As we are unified as one, not when you get married, we're two separate people that live two separate lives and we do what we want when we want. You know, when you get married and when you start to live a godly marriage and start to understand the godly premise of marriage, there's a hierarchy that was built into God's great plan. And this great plan for us was, Christ at the top, he was at the head of the man,
Mhm.
and then man was the head of the wife,
Yes.
to biblically lead. And, other scripture, and I'll get around to it here in a little bit, talks about cleaving to your wife and you become one.
Mhm.
So this is not a single-sided thing. It's not, hey, I get to go do what I want to do, you get to go do what you want to do, and we never get to talk to each other about it.
Right.
We something that I think even we've kind of adopted into our marriage recently, within the past several years, and is the ability to sit down and truly have conversations
Mhm.
about our goals together and less of our goals separately.
And I think that maybe that is where we failed in the beginning stages of our marriage is because we did try to be like, okay, I'm coming at this as Brittany and you're coming at this as Aaron. And we didn't come to it together. We kind of wanted to um be as two separate gears just meeting up at, the joints rather
Yeah,
than being the same mechanism.
right.
So I guess that brings us into what does God expect of us? And so the first thing that I have written down for a godly husband is he is united to his wife. And we've already kind of touched on that. Um, but that came from Genesis chapter 2, verse 24. Mhm. And it says, this is why a man leaves his father and mother and bonds with his wife, and they become one flesh. So that just, biblically backs what we have already said as they become as one person and should act that way.
Yeah, no, you came out of Genesis with that, right?
Yes.
So, funny enough, how the Bible goes together, and you go over to Ephesians chapter 5 in the 31st verse. It quotes an Old Testament scripture, but Paul says here in this very same verse, for this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two will come or become one flesh. And that is so symbolic of a true Christian marriage. A man and a woman who come together, they fight together, they struggle together, they hurt together, they cry together.
Yes. And so my commentary on that specific verse um, was saying that Paul did come from Genesis 2:24. He appealed to it, which is God's initial statement regarding the marriage. The marriage commitment takes precedence over every other human relationship. And I think that that is something that we fail oftentimes just as a general blanket statement for marriage, that we sometimes lose the mindset of, I need to consult my husband or my wife. Rather, we get caught up in, well, let me go get four other opinions
Hmm.
from everybody else, when in a godly marriage, it is me and you against the world,
Hmm.
and I think that that helps us do kingdom work in a godly way.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, that's doing kingdom work is what we should want to do together.
Mhm.
And when we do have that cohesiveness, when we do have that planning together, when we do have that loving one another like we're truly supposed to, and we have that relationship where we do see ourselves as one in union, then yeah, we get a lot more done.
Mhm. So, do you have what's your first thing that you found for a woman?
Well, I think that my opinion, first of all, on how I tell you that you should be as a woman makes all the difference in the world. And you should take my word for how you should be as a wife from my point of view.
Okay,
No, I
let's
mean,
see
but
what you got.
but seriously, it's easier for a man to actually look at the Bible and say, "Hey, what's a good woman?" versus a
Mhm.
woman to look at the Bible and say, "Hey, what's a good man?" But really not, because you should be looking at Christ the entire time you're looking at the Bible, and you can see what a good man is.
Now, I will say that as far as looking up online, because that's kind of how I go about some of my studies, is I'll type in a topic, um, like online, to get point scriptures to kind of head my search, and then I'll go from there. So I can type in, what does a godly woman look like? And immediately I get Proverbs 31. And I said that because I know that's where you're coming out of.
Oh, so you're just gonna eat and
Yes.
tell everybody what I've got going on. I see. Okay.
But it was harder for me to find more than a handful of things for a man. And I think the reason being is some of the points that I'm going to bring out later.
Well, and I think there's some points that you can take from Proverbs 31, even looking at it from the type of woman that I'm going to talk about here from Proverbs 31 is going to have to come from a certain type of man.
Mhm.
So I guess, I mean, just to kick us off here, in study, if you get into Proverbs 31, then what you'll find is it says that in the 10th verse, who can find a wife of noble character? She is far more precious than jewels. So first off, it kicks off with who can find a wife of noble character, and that's a big thing. A good woman, a virtuous woman, I think is how the King James version puts it out. Um, is more precious than rubies. Who can find a woman who is good to the and then he says the heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will not lack any good thing. So, as a husband, I have to trust in you. And as a wife, you are to be trustworthy. Your character should be of trustworthiness. And I should be able to trust anything that I say to you, and I should be able to trust anything that you say to me. And not only that, but it says that he will not lack any good thing, anything good. So, when you're looking at it from that perspective, a woman to her husband to be virtuous, to be noble in character, to be what I would consider to be a rightly woman for living up to this, what we should be living up to in a married couple. You know, it's a trustworthiness. I should trust you
Mhm.
to the very end, to the point where nothing bad is going to come out of my trusting you.
Right.
We trust each other, and when we trust each other, then there is nothing bad that comes out of that trust. And it says she rewards him with good, not evil. How many times do you see people in the world that, I mean, their relationships are nothing but bickering and fighting,
Mhm.
and not healthy bickering and fighting, not
Right.
not little arguments. It's truly things that hurt.
Well, now I will say that, like, if you ask our son, he'll be like, "Oh, yeah, my favorite time is in the car when, our parents are fighting," and if he says that to people who don't know us, their eyes go up like, "Oh, yeah? Tell us more, preacher man. What are you fighting with your wife about?"
I think
But
we have Bible debates,
we have debates and we have sarcastic picking, and, our children, that's what they think fighting is just
but I mean, it does say she rewards him with good.
yeah, good.
So no evil is to be spoken in this house anymore because of what Proverbs 31 here says, right?
Right, right.
But, it's one of those things that she rewards him with good, not evil, all the days of her life. So as long as she is alive, she is building up her husband.
Mhm.
And I think the same goes for the husband. All the days of my life, I should be building you up.
Well, and I think from a woman's point of view, reading or hearing that, we should build up our husbands because if you think of a man, the world expects them to be tough and to be, fearless, and we should be a safe space for our husband, because
And
you
vice
should
versa.
trust us. We should find comfort and solace in one another because between us as one, you know, in a godly relationship, we that goes back to trust is we trust each other to be that safe spot.
Yeah. And I mean, and then you kind of leave off of this idea of trust, this idea of building one another up. And you really dive down more into her specific characteristics as you move on into Proverbs 31. And it says, as you move on into Proverbs 31, it says, she selects wool and flax and works with willing hands. You know, it's saying that when you find a good woman, you're going to find a good woman who's willing to work, who's willing to go and put the effort in. And I think that's just it. Like, so many times we look at relationships, and when we look at a relationship, we look at it from the man is going to put in all of the effort.
Mhm.
And it's not. It's that a woman should also be putting effort in towards her man. A woman should be putting effort in towards her household, and very much the same, vice versa.
Right.
And then it goes on, and you go a verse down from that. She is like a merchant ship bringing food from far away. She rises while it is still night and provides food for her household. You know, I'm not saying that it is a woman's job to cook, but if I'm away, and you have to
Mhm.
look at it in context of time here.
Right.
If I'm away from the home and I'm working, if I've gone out to the fields well before daylight to go get things done, to go feed the animals per se, because I mean, I think there's a lot of people, even in today's time, that You can look at farm life,
Mm-hmm.
and as you look at farm life, I could be out there and I could go feed the animals at 4 o'clock in the morning before day
Right.
breaks, before I go to work. And I mean, if we had a milk cow, I could be out there doing milking at early hours of the morning. And during that time, you're not scared to get up and fix breakfast. You're not
Right.
scared to get up and prepare a meal for the children. You're not scared to take on those duties of the household.
Right.
And it just goes even more than that, because it says provides food for her household and portions for her female servants. I mean, I know you guys don't have female servants nowadays,
Darn it.
but if you did, then you were good to them as well.
Right.
And that's the thing here. We're talking about a kingship in Proverbs. We're talking about a man who was king, who was writing these proverbs.
Well, I think that the part about the servants and being kind to them goes back to that noble character that the woman should portray is, not only are you good to your husband, but you should be good to everybody. That shows your character.
Even those who are subservient to
Yes.
you.
Even those who, in the times, would seem less than as far as how the world would see them.
Yeah, and then you move on from there. And you want to talk about a good woman. Let's talk about a woman who can go out and can look at a field, evaluate it for purchase, and make a good decision. Because it says here, after she rose it, and after she is able to feed the household, and after she's able to feed her female servants, she evaluates a field and buys it. And she plants a vineyard with her earnings. So we look at a vineyard, and you may not have something right now out of a vineyard, right?
Right.
So you're talking, if you, let's just say you had a grape vineyard for wine, you might be 2 years, 3 years before you actually get a product, but it was a good investment.
Right.
The same thing was for olive and olive presses at this time. You may have been a little ways out, but if you found good ground,
Mhm.
if you could evaluate the ground and if you could make a good, wise decision financially, then you could see a profit later. So she makes wise purchases. You know, many times we have been able to be like, oh, well, I can't look at something. You make a decision, you buy it.
Right.
And I just trust you because I know that you're going to make a good decision. You know, I think that was part of how we ended up here at this farm was she made a decision and she looked at it and she said, hey,
That
we should buy this farm.
that is a story for another time because in the scheme of things, I accidentally bought the farm. Accidentally. But again, story for a different time.
She plants a vineyard with the earnings that she has. She's wise with her money. She's wise with the things that she does. She's wise with her purchases. She makes good decisions, and that's the best way I know how to say that. And she invests well because after she does this, she draws on her strength. She reveals her strong arms. Uh, and reveals that her arms are strong. She sees that her profits are good, and her lamp never goes out at night.
Her
When
lamp
you can
never
go
goes
and
out.
buy a good field, when you can provide a good investment and you can watch over that profit come in, then you have also made sure that you are always prepared
Mhm.
for due season or out of season because it's monetarily, those profits are good from what she has invested in. She's making sure that she is good monetarily. She's making sure that she's prepared. And the lamp that never goes out takes me, and it reminds me of the story about the 10 virgins
Yes.
that the lamp oil, the few that forgot their lamp oil, they looked at the other ones and they said, hey, do you have any to spare?
Right.
And the other ones were like, no, we don't have any to spare. And when the bridegroom came out, he took the ones who were prepared.
Mhm.
And those who were not prepared came and knocked on the door, but they were not let in. So you have to be prepared. And I think that is the key to what it says there. She extends her hands to the spinning staff and holds the spindle. You might not even be the one working,
Mhm.
but you're still willing to help.
Right.
You might not be the one that's actually spinning the yarn, but you're willing to help spin or hold the spindle.
So moral support for those home reno jobs. Hey, I'll hand you the nails that you're nailing into the wall. I'll hold the flashlight. Might not do it right, but I'm willing to. Right.
So, as much as you're willing to help those that work,
Mhm.
then it kicks back and it says something else here. It says that you're willing to help those who are in need because it says her hands reach out to the poor and she extends her hand to the needy. That's something that is overlooked in a lot of places, especially today in America. I know because it's almost common to see needy people.
Mhm.
And oftentimes we look at it and we just drive right by. But, we should be the people as a whole that stops and says, "Hey, is there anything I can do to help you?"
Right.
Reach out a hand, extend a hand. Be Christ-like, I guess, is the best way to say
Yeah.
it. Um, but not only willing to help those at work, but willing to help those in need. So we talked about preparedness and financial, but she's also prepared physically with items because it says she keeps her family clothed. She's not afraid for her household when it snows. She's not afraid because she's prepared. She's going to make sure that even when it snows, all her household are doubly clothed. And I'm going to make sure they
Mhm.
got what they need. And she makes her own bed coverings and her own clothing. Her clothing is fine linen and purple, and her husband is known at the city gates. So this is the big one. This is the everything that I've talked about right now is virtue of the woman, characteristic of the woman. This is characteristic of who she married.
Right.
Her husband is known at the city gates where he sits among the elders of the land. So we know elders are people who are looked at as people who are wise, people who
Mhm.
have good rapport, people who have good characteristics, who are good people. And that's exactly what the city gates was a place where good people went to hang out. And it says just as much about a woman's character in who she chooses to shack up with
Lightly put, right?
than any of this other stuff. Because it goes back to that submission of a wife to the husband.
Mhm.
If you are in a godly marriage, then I would hope that you have a resemblance of a godly man who is leading that family, that you're
Right.
walking right behind, right beside. And, it just amazes me because it's the man that she chooses. It says here for a virtuous woman that she should choose a man of good reputation,
Mhm.
you know. And I know that not everybody's a man of good reputation when you meet him,
Right.
but I'm also a fan of God's grace.
Mhm.
And I'm also a fan of the fact that if you are trying to live a Christian walk, and I'm not speaking to something that is an unbeliever right
Right.
now. Right now, we're speaking to somebody who is absolutely a believer, who is somebody that is driven for Christ and that style of marriage.
Mhm.
And if you ever get to the point where you are a believer and you want to be a believer and drive towards this style of marriage, then you have a guideline.
Right.
But be a good, reputable man. And if you're a woman that is living a godly lifestyle, seek out a man of good reputation.
Mhm.
Don't settle for less. Don't settle for somebody who drags your reputation down, I guess you could say.
Right. Find somebody who is going to build you up.
Yeah. And then you move down, and it talks about she's selling things to the merchants, but it says strength and honor are her clothing in the 25th verse, and she can laugh at the time to come. I know a lot of strong women out there.
Mm-hmm.
I know a lot of very good Christian women, and they are strong women, and they are prepared to laugh even when the hardest of times comes. So I think for what a good Christian wife is going to see is going to be a mimicking of her husband's ability to maintain strength
Mm-hmm.
in a hard time. In those times where it's hard to maintain strength, we continue to maintain our strength. We continue to maintain honor in what we
Mm-hmm.
do. We don't fall below the line of, okay, well, I'm going to get down here on the devil's level.
Right.
And
But I think that also goes back to what we talked about in our last episode, and it was enduring through trials brings joy because you know
yeah,
that you have future relief.
also, when you're prepared for those hard times, when you're
Mm-hmm.
strengthened and honored in those hard times, and it moves right back down into the 26th verse, and he says, her mouth speaks wisdom. She's smart.
Mm-hmm.
You are smart.
Thank you.
And that's the thing is we have to be in a place where she speaks wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
And how does a woman learn to speak wisdom? Through following a godly example.
Mm-hmm.
And who is her godly example? Her husband.
Her husband.
So loving instruction is on her tongue. She speaks wisdom. She speaks in a way that she can instruct. She speaks in a way that teaches, you know, and that's important, especially for a mother, is to be able
Yes.
to instruct with wisdom and love, but also to be strengthened. And we're going to talk about that a little bit here, a little bit on mother. But she watches over the activities of her household and is never idle. She's not lazy.
Right.
You know, it's so easy in the world that we live in to fall into convenience. But when we're following Christ, Christ is not a convenient thing to follow. So once again, I think this can kind of kick back and flip right back around to a woman who follows a man who's lazy is going to be lazy, but a woman who
Mm-hmm.
follows a man of good reputation who is not lazy, who goes out and strives to do better, she as well should strive to do better, to strive to want to do more. She watches over those activities of her household, and she is never idle. You're always doing something. And I mean, you're the only person I've got to really compare this to. In my life, you're the only wife I've ever had, so
Yeah.
you're the one. But you know, even in the times where you're sitting down, even in the times where you're doing what would seem to be a restful activity, you're either in studying the Bible or you're doing some kind of cross stitch knitting and embroidery, whatever that stuff is
Mm-hmm.
that you do with a little hoop and needle.
Right.
You know, you're always doing something. There's never a time where you're being out of the way. There's never a time where you just sit still and don't do anything.
Right.
Especially for an extended period of time. I don't think I've ever seen. Now, you might be a little ADHD,
Yeah, just a little bit.
undiagnosed or so, but it says here, her children rise up and call her blessed, and her husband praises her. That's so easy to do when you're walking in a godly lifestyle. When you speak with wisdom, when you are strong, when you live out these virtues, your children are going to see it because they're literally watching you every single day. They're seeing what you do, they're
Mm-hmm.
seeing what you say. They're going and they're truly walking in your footsteps. And there's an old country song from early 2000s, and it said, walk a little straighter, Daddy, because I'm basically
Mhm.
following you. You're leading me.
Well, and like throughout this study, it just kept ringing in my head, be the wife you want your son to marry. Expect from your husband
Yeah,
what you want your daughter to expect from her husband. And when you have that in your mind of if I if I take this from my husband and it is less than satisfactory, I am giving that example to my daughter that that's okay.
yeah,
Whereas, a husband should teach his daughter what to expect from a man, a godly man.
yeah,
And just like that, a wife should teach her son what to expect from his future wife.
right. And it says, many women have done noble deeds, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting. You can be ugly, is what it says here. But as long as you're a good woman, you're going to be just fine. But all jokes aside, seriously,
Right.
charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord will be praised. You can put all the makeup on in the world, and it's not
Hmm.
going to make you look any better to God.
Right.
You can try to be as beautiful as the most beautiful person that you can think of in the world, and you're not going to fake it to God.
Right.
Praise Him,
Hmm.
worship Him, fear Him, and it says, will be praised. Give her reward of her labor, and let her work praise her at the city gates. So when your husband's sitting there talking about those men and those elders at the city gates, those elders and those other people that are of high regard at that city gate should be able to look and be like, you got a good woman. She's always doing this. She's helping you. She's following you, and you're leading a good family. And that's exactly how it is. But the thing is, and one thing I want to leave with as we get into your perspective of this is, I studied this out and I wrote, if a good woman is expected to be accompanied by a man of God and good reputation, then the man must be of good character, known as a good man, and should fear God in his labors as well.
Hmm.
It's not single sided. I should be leading my family well, and it should shine down through everybody.
Yes. Well, and that was a good segue to mine because one of the points is he is the head of his home. He guides his home. And another point was that he provides for his family. Now that comes out of First Timothy, and it's kind of very blunt, which if you've ever read the Bible, it is very straightforward and kind of a slap you in the face kind of book.
Yeah,
Um, that's what we need sometimes. Now, it says he provides for his family. Um, in First Timothy chapter 5 verse 8 says, "But if anyone does not provide for his own family, especially for his own household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever." Now, that when I first went into this, I had a monetary perspective from that. The husband should provide monetarily. But here, it's not what it was saying. The strong language used in this is talking about the spiritual responsibility of providing for his family. And
right.
that goes along with the head of the home, is a godly husband is supposed to lead his family to Christ. And he does that by being the example for his family. So A godly husband is also supposed to walk in integrity, and he's supposed to leave a legacy. And again, leave a legacy. Immediately, I wanted to go to the monetary thing, but I'm like, here, we're in the Bible. Money means nothing.
Right.
Leaving a legacy. And I go back to Pap's funeral, and you hear, wow, he was such a good man. That is the legacy that a
Yeah.
godly husband is supposed to leave, is his character and his family and how he has taught and directed his family.
Yeah, I mean, you want to leave something, and not just a physical inheritance,
Mhm.
but it's like Hebrews. You go over into, I think, the 11th or 12th chapter of Hebrews. I don't have it right in front of me, but you've got all those great witnesses
Mhm.
that were before you, and it's the great. uh, Basically, there's a song out that's called "The Giants of the Faith," and they left a legacy that we stand on today
Mhm.
because they were faithful. We saw that God was faithful to them, and we still trust in the same God with the same faith, or we should with that same faith, knowing that even to the end, He's with us.
Right, exactly. And I seen this thing on Facebook where it says it doesn't matter if your kid gets into Harvard, is he getting into heaven? And that's the legacy that you should strive to leave for your children, is to guide them to where they do have that relationship with Christ,
Yeah.
to where when you leave this earth, you know that you will be reunited in heaven.
Yeah.
Um, so the next thing that I have for a godly husband is that he shows his wife honor. And this is coming out of 1 Peter chapter 3 verse 7. And it says, "Husbands, in the same way, live with your wives in an understanding way, as with a weaker partner, showing them honor as co-heirs of the grace of life, so that your prayers will not be hindered." Now, it says weaker partner, and I know that a lot of men are going to be like, yeah, you're weaker, submit. There it is. That's what it says. And it just simply means that most of the time, wives are physically weaker. And I can admit that. Sometimes you have to open the pickle jar. That's okay. But what it's really pointing out is
Throwing the hay bales in the barn.
throwing the hay bales in the barn. You can do all that stuff. Because apparently, when you're around, just all my strength leaves me, and I'm not Superwoman anymore. And that's okay. But what this verse is really pointing out is that to honor her as co heirs of the grace of life, or to treat them as fellow inheritors of salvation. Jesus died for her too.
You're not getting
Treat her like
any
that.
less of a reward
Right,
because you're a
exactly.
woman.
Exactly.
You get the same thing.
Exactly. Jesus died for you, he died for me the same way.
Yeah, and Paul addresses this also
Mhm.
when he says that there's neither Jew nor Greek, there's neither male nor female in Christ Jesus. We're one, we're in unity.
Absolutely. Now, the last thing, um, or one, I guess, of the last things that I have is loves his wife like Christ loves the church. And this is coming out of Ephesians. Um, let's see if I've got it here. Chapter 5, verse 25. And it says, "Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself for her."
And this verse is coming right on the heels of wives, submit yourselves to your
It
husbands.
is. It is. Um, but so the Greek word that translated love indicates a love that continues. And I love that explanation, a love that continues, because that means love is a verb that requires action. So I have written down love is a deliberate attitude leading to action that concerns itself with another's well being. So your husband should treat you intently, that he takes into account your well being. And back onto the example, a husband is to be an example to his wife. And the way he does that is he sets the example of how he follows Christ. How am I supposed to know how to submit to my husband if he doesn't show me through how he submits to Christ? And I think that that is a really big thing um, in today, because men want their wives to submit, but a lot of men have trouble submitting to Christ.
Absolutely. I mean, you're talking about a ton of people that have misrepresented these verses for years, and they use it as a way to make the woman less than the man. But in reality, the woman's no less than the man. They're a subservient wife is only that way because her husband is subservient to Christ and is leading a good example. You know, you can't expect a woman to submit to a man who's wrong all the time, who lives unrighteously,
Right.
who doesn't live with respect, who doesn't live living that life at the city gates with the elders.
hmm Well, and I think that that could go into the unequally yoked conversation.
Yeah.
It is really hard to be the wife that I'm supposed to be if you're not being the husband you're supposed to be.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we've lived both sides of that spectrum, you know.
hmm
I've I said it in the last podcast, and it's not something that I'm ashamed of because it helped to mold my Christian life.
Right.
Is that I haven't always been a great husband. Thank God for His grace. Thank God for salvation through Jesus Christ.
Amen.
You know, so, but through that submittal of myself, that self sacrifice that I had to have, you know, and it takes you back to like Peter when he says, Peter, do you love me?
Mm-hmm.
Lord, you know I love you.
Right.
Yeah, but Peter, do you love me? Lord, you know I love you. And when Jesus used the word love, his first example of the word love in that sentence was agapeo, which is that agape love, that selfless, sacrificial, are you willing to put it all on the line for
Mm-hmm.
me love? And we have to submit to that
Mm-hmm.
to love Christ, but we also have to submit to that in our lives, that that's what we want to lead our family on, is that agape love that is self-sacrificial, that I would do anything to make sure that as a family, I will lead my family in a way that they will be led to Christ and that they can also experience His love, His mercy, His salvation, and
Mm-hmm.
God's grace.
Well, and one of the things kind of telling off of that that I screenshotted before we started this, a little section of it says, how would you ever learn grace to pour out your favor on someone who did not deserve it if you were married to someone who was always deserving of all good things? And you said that in the beginning of our marriage, you feel that you were not a good husband, but I agree with you to the fact that I am grateful for those hard times because it did get us to where we are now. Because through that, through the prayer and enduring of those trials, we have learned to love each other on a different level than when we were first married.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it took some perseverance and some, I guess, to go back to the last podcast episode, endurance. But, I don't think either one of us were living close to Christ at that time. You more than me, but we both were not what I would consider today to be good Christian people.
Right. We had a bunch of faults. Um, but again, I think that that goes to um, attribute to that one flesh.
Yeah.
If one of us is lacking, then it's going to pull the other one down.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that we can leave with some encouragement to those out there that are listening is that you are in this together.
Mm-hmm.
And if one of you is failing, both of you are either one of two things is going to happen. One of you is going to be very unequally yoked,
Mm-hmm.
or one of you is going to follow into the failure of the other.
Yes.
And we don't want to follow into the failure of the other. So we want to live a lifestyle. And I encourage everybody that's listening to live a lifestyle that is geared with Christ as your focus,
Mm-hmm.
understanding grace, understanding submission to Him, and lead your family in that way.
Yes. And I think that the biggest thing that helped us in our marriage was prayer. I can remember praying for so long for you, and the best way that I pray is I write my prayers down.
Yeah.
That just it helps me focus. It has my hands doing something. And I think that during one of our hardest times during our marriage, you actually found that box of prayers that I had for you.
Yeah.
And I think that that was a big turning point
Yeah.
as well.
Well, and I think that was one of the things that, as we are one, there was a time as we got closer to getting our lives back on track
Mhm.
that you were really diving a lot deeper and you were really trying a lot more. And I think to a degree, I kind of led off of that and said, we've got to do better as a couple. I've got to do
Mhm.
better. And, I've got to work on myself. And that's kind of where that moment of clarity came in. And I said, we really need to go and get back in church. And it
Yeah.
wasn't a, hey, let's go clean up and be better and get back in church. It
It
was
was quite
a
the opposite,
it was a look, I know I'm broken and
yes.
I need something more than what I am.
It was an ugly cry for both of us, just sobbing in the floor, and I can remember Aaron saying, "We're going to church tomorrow. Text your mom. What time does it start? We're gonna be there." And I said, "Well, service starts at, I think it was like 10 a.m.,
Yeah.
11 a.m., something like that." And he said, "No, not service. We're going to Sunday school too." It was all in from that breaking point on. And I think that
And
that,
it's been that way for several years now.
yeah, yeah, it was, you know, full pedal to the metal, deep dive in. And I think that that's the beautiful thing of Christ is it didn't have to be a beautiful reunification because in its own way it was.
Yeah.
Because any reunification is beautiful.
Well, yeah, and I mean, there's regeneration, for lack of a better term, is such an amazing thing. I mean, to go from one day we're out here, we're doing what we want to do, we're living a
Mhm.
life the way we want to live it, and then, like in a instant, in a heartbeat, it was like this ain't working anymore. The dog is growling. But it was this is not physically working for me anymore. I
Yeah.
am broken and I can't do it anymore. I need
Mhm.
something more than me to take over and to do. And, I think from that point forward, we've been able to lead well. And I think we're fortunate enough that our children were a lot younger than they are. And
Yeah,
now they have gotten to really grow up seeing the better side of things and
right.
seeing the side of things where we do get to lead them well
Yeah.
and they're not imprinted by our bad habits of old.
Right. And I think that we're very open with our children. Being the example is, if we mess up, we make a point to apologize and explain things through because, we tell them, hey, this is my first time parenting. Um, just like it's your first time being a kid. God gives us the grace and we're going to move on from this. This is what I'm going to do different. This is what I expect you to do different. And I think that we have tried to carry that in our marriage as well. It's like, hey, I messed up. I shouldn't have raised my voice. I shouldn't have took that tone, and I think especially for me, tone is what gets me in trouble.
Mhm.
Because I don't hear my tone a lot of times. And that has sparked a lot of aggravation. But again, I am woman enough to be like, "Hey, look, I messed up and I'm sorry. That came across a lot angrier or a lot more hateful than I intended it to be."
And it takes a lot less time to just also say a prayer
Yeah,
of, God, let me sit down and say this desperate prayer to you and say, God, I need help in how you want me to lead this family. I need
yeah.
help in how you want me to raise these children. God, give me the strength, give me the knowledge, the wisdom. God, give me the patience for those times
Lord, help me deal with this husband today because he's on my last nerve.
when I need to lead well or to raise my family well. And that's a two-sided prayer.
Mm,
That's not just a prayer for a male or a prayer for a female. That's a prayer for both of you.
yeah,
And I think that is the one encouragement that I can leave with as we come to probably a close,
yeah,
getting closer to a close of the podcast here is that, you know, seek God in understanding for every step of your life, every step of your
mm,
marriage, every step of your parenting, every step of everything. And He'll equip you with what you need to persevere.
absolutely. And don't think that your prayers have to be perfect. I talk to God personally like he is my best friend, and I call them my Mamaw prayers. Mamaw Wilkerson was always mumbling a prayer under her breath because she truly talked to God constantly without ceasing. And, that molded her into the woman that she was. And that was such an example to me,
Yeah.
and I think that as important it is to say individual prayers, praying with your spouse um, deepens that intimate relationship between the two. um it grows you closer spiritually, and I think that is a very underrated thing.
Yeah.
But I think that we can close on that. If you would like to close us in prayer.
Lord, we thank you for this day, God. I ask that if there's anybody out there that, Lord, that needs the comfort enough, Lord, just to come to you, Lord, just to say, God, I need help. God, I need you to show me a way to lead my family. God, that I need you to go and Lord, just to step in a situation that I can't handle on my own. And I just ask that, Lord, that they have the peace and the knowledge to come to you, that, Lord, that they'll have the willpower to come to you. God, that for us, that you'll continue, Lord, just to, Lord, to bless us in the many ways that you have. And God, that we will never forget to ever be reverent to you for Lord, who you are and the grace that you have shown. God, I just ask for the many that may be listening that, God, that you just watch over their lives. God, that you lead them in or just a way that, or that they can lead their families well, that Lord, that they can live geared towards a lifestyle that, Lord, resembles a marriage like Christ, Lord, in the way that they walk, in the way that they talk. And Lord, that we can continue, Lord, just to grow and to build on our own marriage, that we can continue, Lord, just to grow and to build in the way that, Lord, that we can share your gospel through our lives. And God, I just ask that, Lord, for each and every one that's listening, that you continue just, Lord, to lay your hand of blessings on them. In Jesus' name, amen.
Man.